My name is Hannah Brooks, and I'm 38 years old. 2 months ago, I stood in a white wedding dress in front of 147 guests, about to marry the man I had spent 6 years loving. I thought I was walking into the happiest day of my life. I was wrong, because 37 minutes before I was supposed to say I do, a little girl in a pale pink dress looked up at my fiancé, smiled, and called him Daddy. And what I found out in the next 48 hours didn't just destroy my wedding. It exposed a lie so deep, so calculated, that by the time I was done, the man I was supposed to marry had lost far more than just me. Let me take you back to the morning I was supposed to become Mrs. Hannah Carter. My wedding was at Willow Creek Manor, a white stone venue just outside of Richmond with rose gardens, tall oak trees, and a glass reception hall that looked like something out of a bridal magazine. The kind of place girls pin on vision boards when they're 22 and still believe love is enough to protect them from humiliation. The ceremony was set for 4 p.m. At 3:23, I was upstairs in the bridal suite while my maid of honor, Leah, was pinning the back of my veil. I remember looking at myself in the mirror and thinking I looked calm. Not excited, not emotional, just sure. That was the thing about Ethan Carter. He made me feel sure. He was 41, a commercial real estate broker, 6'2", dark blonde hair, clean smile, expensive watch, the kind of man who always knew which wine to order and how to charm people within the first 3 minutes of meeting them. He had that dangerous kind of confidence that doesn't feel arrogant at first. It feels safe, until it isn't. We met 6 years ago at a charity fundraiser my firm had audited. I'm a compliance analyst for a medical supply company, which sounds boring unless you've ever had to uncover fraud hidden in 6 different spreadsheets and 3 shell accounts. I notice patterns. I notice inconsistencies. I notice when numbers don't match. What I didn't notice was that the man I was planning to marry had built his entire life on the assumption that no one would ever look too closely. At 3:23, I didn't know any of that. At 3:23, I was still worried about lipstick transfer and whether my mother would cry too early during the ceremony. At 3:24, there was a knock on the bridal suite door. Leah opened it. One of the venue coordinators stood there, looking pale. "There's a woman downstairs asking for Ethan," she said. Leah frowned. "Who?" The coordinator swallowed. "She says it's urgent." I remember rolling my eyes. Because weddings attract chaos. There's always someone who forgot flowers, or lost a boutonniere, or has a last-minute emotional crisis because their boyfriend from college also got invited. I thought it was something stupid. I said, "Tell Ethan to handle it." The coordinator didn't move. "She brought a child," she said. That got my attention. Leah and I looked at each other in the mirror. I don't know why, but something in my chest tightened, so suddenly it felt like instinct. Not logic, not suspicion. Instinct. I should have listened to it sooner. I walked downstairs, still holding my bouquet. I didn't even realize I was gripping it too tightly until later, when I found little crescent-shaped marks from the rose stems in my palm. The main entrance hall was half full of early guests. My Aunt Deborah was fixing her earrings in the reflection of the glass doors. My cousin was trying to keep her 2-year-old from touching the cake display. The pianist was playing something soft and expensive. And standing near the front staircase was a woman I had never seen before. She was maybe 34 or 35, dark brown hair tied back in a low ponytail, navy coat. No makeup except concealer she'd applied badly under her eyes like she'd been crying or hadn't slept. Beside her stood a little girl in a pink cardigan, white tights, shiny shoes. She couldn't have been older than 5, and she was holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. The woman looked directly at Ethan. Ethan had just come in from the terrace with his best man mark. The second Ethan saw her, all the color drained from his face. That was the first moment I knew this wasn't random. The second moment came 3 seconds later. The little girl saw him. Her whole face lit up. She smiled the way children smile when they recognize someone they love. And then she said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "Daddy." The room changed. There's no better way to explain it. 1 second there was wedding noise. The next, there was silence, so complete I could hear the pianist stop mid-note. My bouquet slipped in my hand. Ethan froze. The woman didn't look at me first. She looked at him, and when she spoke, her voice was low and controlled in a way that made it even worse. "You weren't answering your phone," she said. "I didn't know where else to go. I think I asked, 'Who is this?' Or maybe I whispered it. Maybe I didn't say it at all. Because suddenly Leah was beside me. Mark was staring at Ethan. And my mother was halfway across the room, already sensing something was wrong the way mothers do before anyone else. The little girl tugged the woman's sleeve and said it again. Softer this time. Mommy, why isn't Daddy talking? That word hit me harder than if she'd slapped me. Mommy. Daddy. Not confusion. Not coincidence. Not a child making a mistake. A family. A whole family. Standing in my wedding venue. 37 minutes before my ceremony. And Ethan, the man who once told me he wanted honesty more than anything, looked like a man trying to calculate which lie would cost him the least. That should have been the worst part. It wasn't. Because then the woman reached into her purse and pulled out a folded manila envelope and said, I didn't come here to make a scene. I came because if you're really about to marry her, she deserves to know what kind of man you are. If you've never had your entire future collapse in public, it's hard to explain what your body does. You don't scream first. You don't cry first. Your brain tries to reject reality like it's an error message. I remember staring at the envelope like if I didn't touch it, whatever was inside couldn't become real. Leah took it before I could. My mother stepped closer. Mark muttered, Ethan, what the hell is this? Ethan finally moved. He reached for the envelope too fast. Don't, he said sharply. Too sharply. That was his mistake. Because guilty men don't panic at rumors. They panic at paperwork. The woman stepped back from him and looked at me. Not cruelly. Not smugly. Almost with pity. I'm Sophie Lane, she said. And that little girl is Ava. Ava was still clutching her rabbit and staring up at Ethan with the kind of hurt confusion that should never exist on a child's face. I asked the only question my brain could still form. How long? Sophie looked at Ethan before she answered. Then she said, She's 5. You can do the math. The room didn't erupt. That's what movies get wrong. People don't always gasp dramatically. Sometimes they just go still. And that stillness is worse. Because it means everyone is watching your life break apart in real time. Leah opened the envelope. Inside were a birth certificate, a stack of printed bank transfers, and 6 pages of text message screenshots. The birth certificate was on top. Ava Lane. Date of birth, February 11th. Father, Ethan James Carter. My knees almost gave out. Leah grabbed my arm before I hit the floor. My mother said Ethan's name in this strangled, horrified voice I had never heard before. And Ethan did what liars always do when the truth finally catches them. He didn't confess. He tried to control the room. Hannah, he said, stepping toward me, hands up like I was a wild animal he could still calm. This isn't what it looks like. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because if a man has a 5-year-old child standing 10 feet away calling him daddy, what exactly is it supposed to look like? But Sophie wasn't done. She looked me straight in the eye and said, He told me he ended things with you 3 years ago. He told me you were his unstable ex who wouldn't let go. That sentence hit me harder than the child. Because betrayal is one thing. Rewriting me into a story where I was the problem. That lit something in me I don't think Ethan had ever seen before. And if he had, he would have been a lot more afraid of what happened next. At 3:41 p.m., I did something my guests still talk about. I handed my bouquet to Leah. I turned to the wedding coordinator. And I said, Cancel the ceremony. Not quietly. Not shakily. Calm. Clear. Like I was making a business decision. And in a way I was. Because marriage is a contract. And I had just discovered mine was fraudulent before it was signed. The room exploded after that. My mother started crying. My Aunt Deborah started shouting. Mark pulled Ethan aside and hissed something I couldn't hear. My father, who had liked Ethan way too much for my comfort for the last 6 years, looked like someone had unplugged him from the wall. And Ethan, he followed me upstairs to the bridal suite like he still believed he had access to me. Leah tried to block the door. I let him in. Not because I wanted closure. Because I wanted answers. The second the door shut, he started talking too fast. It wasn't serious. We were on and off. She knew about you. She's trying to manipulate this. That one made me snap. I said, There is a child downstairs who just called you daddy in front of my grandmother. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried a different lie. I was going to tell you. That line should be tattooed on the foreheads of half the men in America. I folded my arms and stared at him. When? No answer. After the honeymoon? No answer. After I changed my last name? No answer. After I legally tied myself to a man with a hidden daughter and a secret second life? That's when he said the sentence that ended any chance he had of salvaging even my pity. He said, I didn't think it mattered anymore. Didn't think it mattered. A child. A woman. 5 years of lies. And he had decided it no longer mattered because it had become inconvenient to his future. I remember looking at him and realizing something chilling. I had never actually known this man. I had known the version of him that benefited from being loved. And then I asked him something I almost didn't ask. A question that changed the whole story. I said, Is she the only one? And Ethan hesitated, just for 1 second. But 1 second was enough. That was the moment I knew there was more. And when a liar hesitates, you don't stop asking. You dig. Most women would have ended it there. Called off the wedding. Cried. Told everyone to go home. Spent a week in bed eating takeout and deleting engagement photos. And I did some of that. Just not first. First, I took the envelope, and I started reading. By 6:10 p.m., after most of the guests had been sent home with some half-baked story about a family emergency, I was sitting in a side office at Willow Creek Manor with Leah, my mother, and a bottle of champagne nobody had opened. The text screenshots in the envelope were bad, but the bank transfers were worse. Every month for the last 5 years, Ethan had sent money to Sophie. Not random amounts. Structured amounts. $2,300. $1,850. $2,300. $2,300. $1,100. Rent. School. Medical bills. Groceries. He wasn't just secretly involved. He was funding a parallel life. And then I noticed something. Some of the transfers weren't coming from Ethan's personal account. They were coming from an account I recognized. An account under the name Carter Development Holdings. Ethan's company. Or more specifically, the company he had spent the last year convincing me to invest in. I went cold. Because 6 months earlier, Ethan had persuaded me to transfer $87,000 into what he called a temporary liquidity bridge for one of his commercial property deals. He told me it would be returned in 90 days with profit. It hadn't been. Every time I asked, he said the same thing. It's tied up in escrow. At 6:14 p.m., sitting in my wedding dress with mascara on my jaw and legal proof of my fiancé's secret child in my lap, I realized something even worse than infidelity. He hadn't just lied to me emotionally. He had used me financially. And that, more than anything, is what turned heartbreak into war. I left Willow Creek at 7:30 p.m. still in my wedding dress, under a coat Leah wrapped around my shoulders. I didn't go home. I went to Ethan's condo. Not to scream. Not to throw things. To verify. Because when something stops making emotional sense, I trust documents more than tears. I still had the code to his office closet. He used to joke that I was the only person organized enough to find anything in there. At the time, I thought it was a compliment. At 7:52 p.m., I found a locked black file box on the top shelf behind old tax binders. At 7:56 p.m., I opened it using the backup key Ethan kept in the same stupid place he kept everything important. Inside a ceramic cigar holder shaped like a bulldog. Inside the box were property contracts, wire confirmations, investor agreements, insurance forms, and a thin blue folder labeled Personal H. For one irrational second, I thought it might be something sentimental. Photos. Letters. Something proving I had mattered in some way. It wasn't. It was a folder containing a draft prenuptial agreement, 2 unsigned revisions, and a side memo from Ethan's attorney. The memo said, if Hannah's capital contribution is not formally documented as recoverable prior to marriage, funds may be absorbed into joint restructuring post-ceremony. I had to read that sentence 3 times. Then I read it again out loud. He wasn't just hiding a child. He had planned to marry me before formally returning my money, which meant once we were legally married, recovering it would have become infinitely messier. He wasn't just dishonest. He was strategic, calculated. And then I found the line that made my hand shake. In the margin, handwritten in Ethan's own pen. After wedding equals easier. That was the moment heartbreak left my body completely. After that, there was only focus. At 9:13 p.m., Sophie texted me. Just one line. There's more. If you want the truth, I'll tell you everything. I almost didn't answer. Because when your life explodes, it's easy to direct all your rage toward the woman standing closest to the blast. But instinct told me something. Sophie didn't look like a woman who came to ruin me. She looked like a woman who had just realized she'd been lied to by the same man for almost as long as I had. So I called her. She picked up on the first ring. And for the next 42 minutes, she dismantled the version of Ethan I had loved piece by piece. He had told her that he and I broke up years ago, that I was emotionally unstable, that he only stayed civil with me because we had financial ties, that he couldn't fully leave because I would destroy his reputation. I sat there in my car outside Ethan's building, still wearing part of my wedding makeup, listening to another woman describe how my fiancé had turned me into a villain in order to keep both of us under control. Then she told me the part that changed everything. "Hannah," she said, "I don't think I was the only one either." I closed my eyes, because I already knew she was right, and then she gave me a name, Vanessa Cole, a woman Ethan had been sending money to in Atlanta for almost 2 years. I actually laughed again when she said it, not because it was funny, because at a certain point betrayal becomes so grotesque it stops feeling human. It starts feeling like a scam operation with cologne. And suddenly, this wasn't just a cheating fiancé story anymore. This was a system. A man running women like accounts. Sunday morning, while most women would have been canceling honeymoon reservations and fielding sympathy texts from relatives, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, 3 legal pads, a labeled folder system, and enough caffeine to damage a horse. Leah came over with bagels and one sentence. "Tell me what you need." That's when I knew I was done surviving this. I was going to document it. By noon, I had built a timeline. My relationship with Ethan, Sophie's timeline, Ava's birth date, money transfers, my $87,000 contribution, the prenup drafts, the attorney memo, property wires tied to company accounts. And then I did what Ethan never expected me to do. I called his investor, a man named Richard Hales, who had attended our engagement party and once told me Ethan was the most trustworthy guy in the room. I asked if we could meet privately. He agreed because people trust calm women more than panicked ones. That was Ethan's second biggest mistake. The first was underestimating how dangerous a betrayed woman becomes when she stops needing closure and starts needing evidence. Richard Hales met me Monday at 8 a.m. in his office downtown. Glass walls, mahogany desk, the kind of office built to intimidate people before they ask hard questions. I wore black. No makeup. No engagement ring. And I brought copies. Richard offered coffee. I said no. Then I slid the first document across the desk. Ava's birth certificate. Then the transfer records. Then the attorney memo. Then proof of my missing $87,000. Richard read in silence for almost 4 minutes. At one point, he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose like a man realizing his trusted broker might actually be a lawsuit in loafers. Finally, he looked up and said, "Did Ethan know you had this?" I said, "Not yet." That changed his expression. Because men like Richard understand 2 things very well. Money and timing. And Ethan was about to lose both. Richard asked one more question. "Why are you bringing this to me instead of court?" I told him the truth. Because if I file first, he'll lie. If his money walks away first, he'll panic. Richard stared at me for a long time. Then he said something I still think about. "You're a lot calmer than I'd be." I smiled and said, "That's because I'm not heartbroken anymore. I'm organized." Tuesday morning, Ethan called me 11 times. By noon, he texted, "Can we talk? You're making this worse. You're misunderstanding everything. You're going to ruin lives over a mistake." A mistake. That word again. As if a secret child, financial manipulation, a fake narrative, a hidden prenup strategy, and multiple women weren't choices stacked neatly into a personality. I ignored every message. Until 3:17 p.m. That's when he sent the only text that actually made me smile. "Who did you talk to?" Panic has a very specific sound. And it sounds exactly like a liar realizing the room is no longer under his control. I replied with 4 words. "You should have told me." Then I blocked him. By Wednesday, things started collapsing. Richard froze one of Ethan's pending property deals. A second investor requested an internal review. Ethan's attorney emailed me asking for a private resolution discussion. That phrase means one thing. They were scared, but I wasn't done. Because I didn't just want my money back. I wanted the truth where it belonged. In public. And Ethan, unfortunately for himself, had already given me the perfect stage. 6 months before the wedding, Ethan's mother had insisted on hosting a formal engagement celebration at the Richmond clubhouse. Champagne towers, a live jazz trio, a giant slideshow of our love story playing behind us. It had been filmed professionally because Ethan liked documenting his own image the way insecure men often do when they're trying to build a brand around being admired. And the venue manager, a woman named Celeste who happened to dislike Ethan long before I did, still had access to the event files. One of those files included a list of the same investors, friends, family contacts, and business associates who had attended. By Thursday night, I had the guest list, the contact list, and a short presentation titled, The Truth Before the Wedding. Not dramatic, not emotional, just fatal. Inside were Ava's birth certificate, my financial transfer records, attorney memo excerpts, proof of parallel payments, and one final slide with a sentence in bold. He didn't almost ruin my life by accident. He planned it. I didn't send it to everyone. That would have been sloppy. I sent it only to investors, family members, Ethan's law firm contact, his mother, and his boss, the people whose opinions actually had consequences. I hit send at 8:46 p.m. And then I slept for the first full night since my wedding day. Friday morning at 7:12 a.m., Ethan was sitting in my driveway. He looked awful. No designer confidence. No polished smile. No expensive man energy. Just a sweaty, sleepless liar in a wrinkled blue shirt holding a coffee he was too nervous to drink. I stepped out of my car and locked it behind me. He said my name like we were still people who knew each other. Hannah, please. I stood 6 feet away. He started crying almost immediately. Not dramatic sobbing. That manipulative, shaky voice crying men do when they realize consequences are finally more expensive than deception. I messed up. You think? I asked. He took a step closer. I was scared. Of what? He looked down. Losing everything. That was the first honest thing he'd said in a week. Maybe the first honest thing he'd said in 6 years. I nodded slowly and said, You should be. Then I handed him a printed envelope. Inside was a repayment demand letter from my attorney, plus one additional page, a custody support contact for Sophie's lawyer. He stared at it, then at me, then back at the papers. And for the first time since this all started, Ethan Carter looked like a man who finally understood that the version of me he had spent years managing no longer existed. He whispered, You told everyone. I said, No. You did that when you decided I was someone you could lie to forever. Then I walked past him, and that should have been the end of it. But karma likes detail. By Monday, Ethan lost 2 major investors. One pending property acquisition collapsed. His law firm contact withdrew from his restructuring deal. His mother stopped speaking to him. And Richard Hales demanded a full internal review of Carter Development Holdings. By Wednesday, my attorney recovered the first $40,000. By the end of the month, Ethan agreed to a full repayment structure rather than risk litigation and fraud exposure. Sophie filed for formal support, and Ava, the little girl in the pink cardigan who unknowingly walked into my wedding and detonated the lie, was finally getting the legal acknowledgement she should have had from the beginning. People always ask me the same question when they hear the story. Did I ever regret not going through with the wedding? No. What I regret is that I almost married a man who mistook my love for blindness. Because that was his final miscalculation. He thought I would break. What he forgot is this. Women like me don't break. We document. And then we end things properly. If you've ever discovered the truth just in time, then you already know this feeling. Sometimes the worst day of your life is also the day you stop being someone else's victim. And sometimes, the little girl who ruins your wedding is actually the one who saves your life.